Hey guys, how you going? Dean from Blog for the Blood God here with another episode of the BloodyOath podcast. On today's episode, I discuss team events and how I think they are the future of competitive 40k. I discuss why I think this is. I share some of my experiences from team events, and I just generally go through each and every component of a team event that makes it vastly superior to singles competitive 40k. So without further ado, let's get into the video. How you going, guys? Dean from Blog for the Blood God here with another episode of the BloodyOath podcast. Continuing on from the last episode, which came out earlier this week, I want to keep the conversation around tournaments going with a focus in this episode on team events and why I think that they are the future of 40k. And why I think it won't be long before we'll start seeing them not completely replacing, but becoming the more dominant and more prominent version of competitive 40k. So first, a little bit about my history with team events. I think is probably a good place to start so that you can get a bit of a scope on my history with the format and some of the experiences that I've had. So I've been into 40k for nearly 20 years now. Been playing it on and off, competitively, non-competitively, narratively, etc. But when I recently moved to Melbourne from my little country hometown, I met a bunch of new gamers and I started attending singles tournaments for the first time. And I started hanging around with a few different, groups of people that were, prominent members of the tournament scene, and playing with them, and I wasn't amazing by any stretch of the definition, but I was a solid all-round player, getting decent results and getting consistent results. So that's sort of where I sort of found my feet as a competitive 40k player. And one year, the Victorian team for the Australian Team Championships, the captain approached me and basically asked me to join their team. And I think this was largely because they were struggling to get 8 players, because the Australian Team Championships was an 8-player team event. And everybody knew I was relatively new to the scene and I hadn't done anything particularly impressive. I hadn't won any major events or anything like that. But I'd played games with the people on the team, and I'd clearly done something to impress them to some extent, because when it got time to try to find that 7th or 8th pick, I was obviously one of their considerations. So I gracefully accepted, and I was glad to be a part of the team. And immediately, my whole perception of competitive 40k changed. The way that that team adopted me and took me under their wing and taught me a lot and worked together, it was amazing. And since then, I've been on the Victorian team every year since, which is 5 years now in a row, I believe. I was captain last year of the team. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the tournament got cancelled the year that I was captain, which was unfortunate. But so I've been captain of a Victorian team. I've been captain of small teams of 4. I've played in every ATC so far that I've had access to, and played in a whole bunch of 4-man team events as well. And also obviously played in a whole ton of singles events. So my experience in 40k stretches across both the singles and the doubles and teams and everything. And the reason that so that's sort of my history. That's where I'm at when it comes to the team stuff. I've been pretty heavily involved. I've even run a few team events myself as a TO. So I've had a fair bit of experience in this format. And the reason that I think it's fundamentally a better game when played as a team is because there's a number of reasons. One of the primary reasons is that you're no longer playing for yourself, you're playing for a team. And this changes the way that people approach the game on a fundamental level and makes it so much more enjoyable. So for example, in a singles event, you have to win every game in order for you to win the event, right? More often than not. Sometimes you can get away with a draw or a small loss if it's a sufficiently big event where there's going to be multiple people and it's possible for nobody to go undefeated. But generally speaking, you need to win every game to win an event. Whereas in a teams event, if you lose a game, it's possible for your team to still win. So it's not as soul-crushing when you lose because you haven't had your hopes and dreams swept out of underneath you, because you've still got the victory in sight. So it takes a lot of the sting out of losing your games, and it also puts a lot more honey on those victories, because not only did you just win a game for you, but you also won a game for your team, and your team are all absolutely stoked that you won your game. Whereas when you win a game in a singles event, often the people, especially if your friends are all on a similar level to you, they're happy for you that you won, but they're also like, fuck, now I have to verse that cunt, you know? Like, the amount of times where I'll be at a singles event and I see one of my mates who I know is a really good player, and there's a small part of me that actually wants him to lose his games so that I don't have to verse him, so that I can have an easier run into the victory, you know? So that's one of the huge differences between the singles and team events, is that in a team event, your victories are sweeter and your defeats aren't as sour. Let's put it that way. But it also, so that's just the on the day stuff, you know? On the day, that's one of the ways it feels. You also get this sensation of, like, you might have, before the event, you might look at all the lists and you might give yourself a score versing each opponent. Like, I think I win this game, I think I lose that game. And then your captain will come up with a way that he's going to try and pair the round, and the way that he's going to use you and whatever. And there'll be times when you'll get thrown under the bus. And so for those of you who haven't played team events before, basically what this means is that if the other team puts up a really strong list and not many people in your team can really verse it, most of the people in your team are worried that they're going to lose, sometimes what they'll do is, if you don't have particularly good matchups elsewhere, they'll throw you into the hardest opponent, knowing that you're probably going to get a hard matchup and lose your round anyway. So they'll throw you into their really hard list so that when you lose, it's not that big of a deal, because it was predicted that you were probably going to lose that round anyway. And that facilitates other members in your team getting bigger wins off the weaker players or the weaker lists on your opponent's team. So the idea is basically you get thrown under the bus in order to protect your team. And when that happens, there's two major advantages to that. And one is that you feel like no one's going to judge you harshly for losing that round. It's okay for you to lose that round, which is amazing. Whereas in a singles event, you never go into a game thinking it's okay if I lose. You know, like, you need, if your goal is winning the event, that is. I should preface this by saying that all of this is dependent on how seriously you're taking the event and how competitively you're taking the event. So if you're taking it super competitively, it's never okay to lose a game in singles, but it is often okay to lose a game in a teams event, if it means that it facilitates the rest of your team getting better matchups. In addition to this, since it's a predicted outcome that you'll probably lose that game, if you're able to maybe get a draw or a small loss where it's like maybe they beat you by like 5 victory points or something like that, it's amazing, because people are like, wow, you were supposed to get crushed by that, really good job. And if you're able to actually turn that into a win, then that can completely flip around. You know, like your team could have been going into that round thinking we're probably going to lose this, but if you're able to turn one of those matchups where your predicted score is going to be a loss into a matchup where you actually win, that can result in your entire team winning that round because of what you did. And this has happened in almost every team event that I've been a part of. There's been rounds where various people on our team have gone, I'll go under the bus to this, and then turn it into a win. There was one game with me in Brisbane when we went up there for the ATC, and I was running like bloodletter bombs and possessed. So I didn't have a single gun in my army. Like, it was all just foot slogging combat stuff. And I got thrown under the bus into a list that had like 5 Eldar flyers. And the theory was, look, you can't hurt them. They can pivot, so it's really hard to move block them, and it's really hard to deny them, and his list had a ton of Dakar, and it was like, yeah, none of us can really confidently beat that. And this was back in the day when they could stack the negative to hit on their flyers, so they're like, even our good shooting armies are going to struggle to kill that. So the theory was, Dean, you don't have any particularly good matchups elsewhere. We do. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into the Eldar, just try not to get tabled, and everybody else in the team will go and, more or less win their games. And me taking that one loss was actually advantageous for the team. And then what happened is a few of them went into matchups that they were supposed to win, and they actually lost their rounds. But I was supposed to lose that round, and I actually turned it into a win. Just by having more OBSEC, more boots on the ground, I was able to sort of just win on victory points, even though I couldn't really hurt any of his stuff, So that was an amazing feeling. And when the rest of the team start looking sad because they're like, oh no, Stewie lost his game, and oh no, Johnny lost his game, and you're like, oh no, they were supposed to win, this is really bad. And then your captain goes, oh, how are you going? And you're like, I think I'm actually going to win this. The way you can turn those frowns upside down by providing that is such an amazing experience, and it's completely unique to team events. You can't get that in a singles event, The camaraderie and the collaborative effort that goes into a team event is absolutely phenomenal, and it's completely changed. It's a completely different type of game at that point, I equate it to, it's almost like fucking singles events, that's masturbating, and teams events is having sex, it's completely different. But the other part about the teams events that's just completely insane is that you work with people on your list. So normally in a singles event, you don't want people to know what you're running, right? Because then they can tailor into it. They can take specific things to try to beat it, and also they can plan for it. So they can go, okay, he's taking this, I'm taking that, and they can practice that game in their head a million times. They might get together with a couple of their mates and practice it, and they'll know what they're versing, and they'll find out ways to beat it. And then when you play on the day, you're going up against somebody who's got experience and put in mental bandwidth into solving that problem. So often when you're taking a competitive event of singles really seriously, you want to keep all your cards close to your chest and not go too public about what you're bringing and what your list is. The problem with that is now you only have one mind, and that mind is yours, and that mind is working on that list. Whereas in a teams event, you'll have 4 to 8 players all working together to try to make sure that every list is as powerful as it can possibly be, Like, you've got other people actively trying to help you make your list as strong as it can be. And they'll talk about it with you, they'll point out any flaws that they see, you'll point out any flaws that you see in their lists, and it's a collaborative effort to make sure everybody's as good as they can be. Whereas in singles events, you just don't have that, some gaming clubs will do that for a singles event. But if you're going in there with the intent to win, it's actually in your best interest to not even tell your own gaming club what you're bringing. And we have this thing I don't know if this is a thing everywhere, but we call it psyops, where basically you try and trick people into thinking that you're taking something that you're not, so that they waste their mental energy and mental resources on coming up with counters and understanding and learning your list when you're not actually running it, which is always very funny. But it's something that it's somewhat counterproductive, and it doesn't really make for very good lists, because you're too busy doing all this psyops bullshit, and you don't ever end up actually collaborating and working with people and making your list better. Whereas in a teams event, you'll have all 8 people, you'll put your heads together, you'll read through every book, and there's often like 2 or 3 people on the team that'll do most of the work in this regard. Like, everybody will write their own list, but there'll be 2 or 3 people that'll go through every fucking codex, and they'll find those little nuggets of things that you might not have considered. Because obviously writing a team's list is slightly different to writing a singles list, because I'll go into that in a minute on why the other reasons that I think teams are superior. But let's just say that the list format is very different as well. And the other thing is, once you've got your lists, you can have practice games with these people that are on your team, some of the better players in your area, hopefully, and actively work together on strategies. So you might write a list, and it might be, let's say top of the meta right now is Dark Eldar, right? You might write a Death Guard list and think, how do I beat Dark Eldar? And what you can do is you can get the resident Dark Eldar player on your team, or just one of your more all-rounder experienced players, to pilot the Dark Eldar list, and you can play a practice game, and they can give you advice on every step of the way on what they think you could have done and what they didn't want you to do, and what you did wrong and all that sort of stuff, so that you can become better as a player. It's almost like a free coaching service by getting involved in this level of the game in a competitive teams event. And that's something that's like, people spend hundreds of dollars, a week, like a month or whatever. Like, they spend good money to get 40k coaching, and it's like, you get more value out of just being on a team, even if it's with a player that might not be the best player in the world. If you've got a team of 4 people and you're all relatively inexperienced, you'll still learn so much from playing in that team format that it's just an immense value for player development. The next thing, though, is that when you're building your lists for team events, it's very different than when you're building a list for singles. Because when you're building a list for singles, you need to be able to reliably take on almost everything. You can't go in there and be like, I'll win any game as long as they don't have toughness 8 vehicles. If they have toughness 8 vehicles, I'm fucked. But anything else, I'm really good. Or I'll win as long as they aren't MSU. Or I'll win as long as they aren't Death Stars or whatever. Like, if you're weak to a particular archetype or a particular faction, then you won't do well in singles, because there's every chance that you'll come up against the thing you're weak against, and then you'll just lose. And so when you're building a singles list, you need to think about the meta and make sure that you can have a path to victory in every game. Otherwise, you won't win. Even if that path to victory is like something that relies heavily on chance, like, I can win, but I have to go first. If I go first, I'll win. Any other situation, I lose. That's fine. You've still got a path to victory there. But if you have literally no path to victory, if you go up against, let's say, Necrons, right? If you go up and just be like, my list, whether I go first or second, doesn't matter. I do not have the capacity to kill those 20-man warrior units. So you're just going into the event hoping that maybe you just won't face Necrons. That's a losing strategy. Whereas in a teams event, that can actually be a winning strategy. And what you might do is you might design a list so that you take the resources out of it that you would have normally put into killing Necron warriors and put all of it into killing mech. And you go, this list just goes in and kills mech. Kills toughness 8 vehicles, put me into something that's got a lot of tanks, and I'll just destroy it, right? And then what your captain can do is he can use that in the pairings, and he can try and manipulate the pairings in such a way that you'll get that mech list, or at the very least so that you'll dodge the Necron list, And because of that, because of the ability in team events to pick your opponent to a degree, that means that you can run these more skewed lists. And it actually works out in your favor to do so. So you might run a list with 3 or 4 knights in it, which in singles you'd be like, this is bad, because if I go up against XYZ, if I go up against something that's got a lot of anti-tank weaponry, I just lose, because they'll just blow me up. I don't have the staying power. I don't have the bodies to control the objectives. I don't have all of these pieces. So if I go up against that anti-tank list, I just lose. But in a teams event, your captain can just make sure that you don't go up against the anti-tank list. And now you're able to take this suboptimal list for singles, optimize it for teams, and go in there and get good results and big wins. And this is one of the fundamental things that I think makes teams the future of 40k, because what it does is it allows you to shore up the weaknesses of certain factions. So if there's a particular faction out there that has this gaping weakness for singles, you just don't see it at singles events. But it might actually be one of the better factions in respects to teams. So there's the huge shift in the meta between singles and teams. It's almost unrecognizably different, because there's certain things that are just unplayable in singles that become absolute weapons in teams. Knights are a pretty decent example of that, but there's tons of examples. Things like Horde, just this flat out balls to the walls Horde. You know, in singles you're like, yeah, but if I come up against like a Space Marine Salamanders list with 1 billion flamers and 1 billion attacks in close combat, like they'll just kill through all my Horde. But it's like, in a teams event, we can make sure that you don't play that list and that you play into something like Knights, for example, where they don't have the firepower to kill through that many bodies, and you'll just walk all over the table. So that ability to pick your opponent makes so many more lists viable that it's a huge difference. Like, you might run a Khorne Berserker list where they're all Khorne Berserkers in Rhinos, and most people would look at that and be like, that is garbage, because if you go up against any serious Dakar or like a Tau army, you'd be like, you just lose. Because you can't deny their Overwatch, you're just going to get shot to death, you can't win. But they can take that list and they can pair you into other combat lists, and now it's like, well, the Berserkers are guaranteed to get to do what they want, which is combat, because you've paired them into combat lists. So they're going to come to you, and then you're going to be able to spring a charge on them and get maximum value out of those softer but harsh combat units. You can actually get value there. So a team event, something like a World Eater's Berserker spam, could actually be a serious threat to your opponent's team, and it's something that you'll never see in singles. So that's a huge one, is being able to pick your opponent and do it that way. But there's just so many reasons why the singles events are nowhere near as fun as the team events, because the meta's different, the prep's different, the sensation and the feeling that you get on the day is different, the camaraderie and the way that you work with your team is different. It's completely just different on its head. Then the other thing is, most team events will have a variety of different table layouts. So most of them, like if you're doing an 8-man or an 8-player team event, you'll probably have 2 tables that are set up really heavy and have tons of ruins on them. And then you'll probably have 2 tables that are set up really, really light. And then the rest of them will be sort of a medium mix. And what this means is that if you're put up where your opponent gets to pair into you, often that means you'll get to pick what table you play on. So that can be a huge game breaker as well, because you might bring just like an intense gun line that has massive amounts of shooting, and then they put you up, and then no matter what opponent gets put into you, you get to pick the table. So you just pick the table that has no terrain on it, and now if you go first, you can blow them off the table. Really changes the way that those lists work, because being able to choose your table and being able to pick a light table, all of a sudden that makes those gunline armies that previously might have struggled, it makes them really powerful. And the same works in reverse. You can go, okay, I'm gonna play something like, let's use the World Eaters combat list again as another example. You could go, okay, well, I'm gonna put that up, and it's gonna pick a really dense table with lots of ruins and lots of like line of sight blocking terrain. And that means that now those Berserkers aren't just getting blown up turn 1. Your opponent actually has to try and get angles on you, and they have to try and come at you, which can completely change the way that the game works. So combination of being able to pick your opponent, on occasion being able to pick your table, it's completely different. And then there's also the pairings process itself is almost more of an exhilarating game in it than the actual games that you play, because often the winner of the winner of that round, which team wins, is going to come down to which team got better pairings, not necessarily which team has better players, and not necessarily which team performed better on the table, but the way that your captain is able to wield each player to their best advantage and get them the best matchups they can be a huge shift in the dynamic of that round. So yeah, there's so many tricks. Like, for example, you might write a list that's really vulnerable to knights, but knowing that list, if we put it up, can pick its table, it all of a sudden it's not vulnerable to knights, because you can go, okay, I'm going to pick a really heavy, dense table, and now those knights are really going to struggle to move around, in which case they're not going to be getting the charges that they need, they're not going to be getting on the objectives that they need to get on, they're not going to be shooting the stuff that they can't see. So all of a sudden that list that was really scared of knights isn't scared of knights anymore, because of the ability to pick its table. So that's just a few of the reasons why I think that the team events are the future. They're also way more exhilarating to watch, because it gives it a sort of professional sports vibe. Like, every tournament that I go to that's a team tournament, you know, you'll see at least a couple of teams will have matching shirts and a uniform, and they're jovial and they hang out together and they're supporting each other, and it just feels like an actual sport. It feels like an actual thing that you're doing, as opposed to just being a bunch of dickheads playing with their war dollies, you know? It gives it an element of legitimacy that you just don't see in the singles events, you know? So yeah, that's just a few of the reasons why I think singles is going to be the future of 40k, because just on almost every level, almost every problem with 40k is almost all of them are solved by team format events, because you don't have the elements of cheating as often, because you've got people that all of a sudden that they're representing other people, so they don't want to risk the reputation of other people. You don't see as much angst, because games that you might lose, you can look across and see that all your teammates are winning, and all of a sudden you're just like, okay, I'm happy to lose this round, I guess. Like, it's not the end of the world because my team are all winning. And often it doesn't really come down to the wire. Most of the time you'll find that one team is just going to win or one team is just going to lose based off the pairings, and you know, it's sort of just then a matter of delivering on expectations, not breaking them, you know? Like, you don't need to go in and break all the expectations. You just need to deliver accurately to what you're expected to deliver. Which is a way more relaxing environment. There's also a lot of really fun banter in the team events, like, you know, teams sassing each other and memes getting thrown around at each other. That's a lot of fun when it comes to 40k, whereas in singles it can feel a little bit like bullying sometimes, when, you know, you're making jokes at other people's expense, and when people are making jokes at your expense, it can feel like you're being bullied, whereas it doesn't feel that way in teams events. Like, you know, when everybody in Australia rags on South Australia. You know, they're like the worst state when it comes to 40k. But we're not attacking any individuals there, you know. So while everybody in South Australia might not like the fact that we pick on their state, we're not picking on them as individuals. You know, we're still like, we respect you all as individuals, but your state sucks. You know, and it's you're able to have the level of savagery in the memeing and the banter without it feeling like a personal attack. And you also have people backing you up. So if somebody picks on your state, so say somebody picks on Victoria, I know that there's 8 people in my team, all of which are ready to defend Victoria in that meme war. So you've got a sense of like camaraderie and a sense of shared purpose, I guess, with the rest of your team, which just makes for such an amazing experience. Over the last probably 3 or 4 years, we've noticed a serious uptick in team events in Australia. Just lots of states are running their own. Queensland run them all the time. I'm really jealous because they're like, a fucking 50-hour drive from home. They're pretty much in another country. So I can't really get there to attend their team events as often as I would like. I have got one coming up next weekend where I'm going to fly there. And we are starting to do them in Victoria a little bit more. We did the Victorian Team Championships a couple of weekends ago. I did the videos and stuff on that. So the team events are really starting to tick up, and I'm hoping that they catch on. And like the Victorian team event that we did recently, we had 104 players. The last event that size was probably like 5 years ago. We generally pull between 60 and 80 players for the larger events in Victoria. So being able to pull 104 for a teams event is amazing. And part of the reason that this works is because if you're running a teams event, you might be the only competitive player in your gaming group, but you might be like, come on guys, let's go to this teams event. I know you're all bad, but let's just have some fun with it. And it allows you to introduce players who might not have considered attending a teams event. You can introduce them to the tournament circuit in a sort of a safe, supported way where they're encouraged by the other people on their team. And it's also an environment where people are jovial and have a lot of fun and a lot of banter. So I think it's also perfect for not only for providing the best possible competitive experience for the veterans and for the serious competitive players, but it's also the best way to introduce newer players and less competitive players into that competitive framework. So you've got competitive framework, you've got introducing new players, you've got providing the best possible thing for the experienced players, you've got getting big numbers, which means bigger money involved and bigger prizes and more prestige, and it's just literally better in every single way. There are a few challenges when it comes to running a teams event, namely that if you have uneven numbers, that's hard, because in a singles event you can just have one player on hand who's your Gumby, and if somebody drops out, that person just jumps in and plays. And then if somebody else drops out, you're now back to even, that Gumby stops playing. They just jump in to fill out the numbers when needed. Whereas if you have, say, 8-player team event, you actually need 8 fucking Gumbies. That's really hard. Like, really hard. And the same goes even for 4-man teams. Trying to find 4 people who are prepared to sacrifice their entire weekend to maybe not even play 40k. It's a big ask. And it's really hard as a TO to organize that sort of stuff. So it's huge respect to the TOs that manage to pull these events off. And the other challenge is how to manage it when just like one player drops from a team. Like, what do you do in that situation? Do you have the Gumby step in and play that player's list? What do you do with that situation? There's a lot of unique challenges to running a teams event. So for those of you who are out there attending team events, I want you to just, next time you're at one, just go up to the TO and just give them a big thank you. Just say, thank you so much for putting this together. Tell them that you appreciate and understand the challenges behind it, because it really is a very difficult thing to pull off. And I've seen TOs lose a lot of sleep over trying to coordinate these events. But these are, and make no mistake, the team events are the thing that is going to shape 40k going forward, in my opinion. Particularly here in Australia. I can't speak for the international scene, but here in Australia, I'm very confident that if we continue on this trajectory, you're going to probably start seeing a 1-to-1 ratio of competitive team events to competitive singles events. And that's amazing. There's a few other things that I want to touch on with team events. One of them is that most team events will have a rule where each faction or each codex is only able to be used once per team. So when you've got 8 players, that means you have to have 8 different factions. And that's really good for representation and diversity in the meta. Because instead of just seeing every cunt and his mum running fucking Space Marines, or whatever the new hot shit is, Dark Eldar now, soon to be AdMech, instead of seeing just everyone running the same shit, it actually forces everybody to think, okay, well, one of our players gets to run Dark Eldar, what's everyone else going to run? And when you have to have 8 unique lists, that starts to get really tricky. It means that you have to find a way to make orcs good, or you have to find a way to do something with this or that, Thankfully, the current state of the game in 9th edition, most factions are playable. Most factions have something good going for them, except for Tau. Sorry, Tau. But, so that's one of the other elements, is the diversity in representation of factions is amazing in team events. And the other thing is, when you're having regular team events, right? And we've noticed this, is you can actually mix up the teams and spread the experience around. So we might have like 2 of Australia's top players. Let's just, for example, use Jeremy and Morrisoli, right? They might, at one event, they might be on a team together with 2 other people. And then in the next event, they might be on separate teams with other players around them. And what this does is, this means that they can work together in some events and then against each other in other events. And because they worked together, they get to experience how each other operate in that format, and then spread that knowledge and experience around. And every time you work together with a different player, you'll learn something different. Like I was recently on a team with Matt Antonello, who isn't the best player by any stretch. I think one of his challenges is that he overthinks things. But I'm one of those players who underthinks things. I try to break my game down to be as simple as it can possibly be by creating these little packages of strategies. Like, this is my strategy. I move forward with the Noise Marines, I warp time, I make sure that I'm within my auras, and I blow stuff up. That's a little package, and I know how to do that and when to do that. But because everything's broken up into packages, sometimes I'll use a play that I've got lined up inappropriately. Like, I'll go too aggressive because I'm just playing an aggressive game, and when I should be playing more cagey, or I'll use a unit to do something aggressive, and in doing so, I'll sacrifice an objective or something like that. And when in reality, I didn't need to do the aggressive thing, I would have been better off just holding my objective. So things like that can often bring me unstuck. But Matt Antonello is the exact opposite, right? Sometimes he doesn't play aggressively enough, or he doesn't play a simple enough game and he gets too lost in his little complex tricks. So when we were on a team together, we both got better for the experience, because he was helping me work on, thinking outside the box and coming up with these unique little tricks and movement blocking and these sorts of things. He was helping me prioritize those, whilst I was helping him make those gut calls and just stop thinking about everything so much and just get it done, just come up with a plan now and then on the day just execute the plan, sort of thing. So between the two of us, we actually both learnt a lot, even though we haven't been on a team since and we'd never been on a team before. So being able to share that and spread the team around and work together with different people, it makes everybody better. It's not a selfish thing, like I want to get better, therefore I need to work with other people. It makes everybody better. And then when everybody gets better, the game gets taken to that next level. And when you're playing on that next level, everything is so much more satisfying, because it's no longer just, his list is OP, therefore he smashed me. Well, no, because you've been playing and you've been skilling yourself up and that person up, now the skill of the player is a lot more involved in the results of the game. So you're able to actually have much more in-depth tactical games, outplaying your opponent, being outplayed by your opponent, and really getting into the into the core of what makes 40k satisfying. There's nothing satisfying about writing a list that's just insanely powerful and then just killing everybody and going first and just winning. Like, you want somebody to do something that you weren't expecting, so that you're like, oh, interesting, that's a challenge, what am I going to do? And then you want to think about what you're going to do and then come up with a solution. And then if that solution works and you still win, even though they made it a hard game, that's way more satisfying than if you just went in and just Timmy stomped, so to speak. So that's one of the reasons why I think intentionally skilling up your opponent is a good thing, or potential future opponents, I should say. So while you're working with the 4 people on your team, while they're on your team, you're doing everything you can to make them a better player, and they're doing everything they can to make you a better player. And then at the next event, you're probably not going to be on their team. So now they have to verse you, the new and improved version of you, and you have to verse them, the new and improved version of them, which makes for a much, much richer experience. The other thing that, and this is maybe a uniquely Australian thing, not 100% sure how this operates over in the States and over in the UK, but in Australia, we have started doing things where the team from Queensland and the team from Victoria for ATC, which is normally 8 players from Queensland, 8 players from Victoria, we're doing a lot of these little 4-man team events, and we're mixing 2 Queenslanders with 2 Victorians to play together. And that's just brought the whole country together much, much closer, because we're able to see each other as allies as well as opponents. And it's creating this really interesting, unique dynamic that you ask anyone in Australia who shared a team with an interstate person, and it's the best thing ever, because even just the local meta up in Queensland is very different to the local meta in Victoria. You know, like, for example, we might not have a single tower player in Victoria, but they might have 10, you know? Or, you know, everybody up there might be running AdMech, whereas we might only have 1 or 2 AdMech players, and they might be new to the scene and quite bad. So the way that those things shape the natural evolution of the meta means that the strategies and tactics employed by one state will be very different to those employed by another state. And with that dynamic in place, when you mix the states and you go, okay, you 2 Queenslanders are working with you 2 Victorians, or like at this recent event, we had 1 4-man team that had someone from Victoria, someone from New South Wales, somebody from Queensland, and somebody from Victoria. Sorry, I think I said Victoria. WA, New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, the four big states. And first of all, the amount of logistics in coordinating and getting a team like that together, like, hats off to the captain, because you've got people from, like, I don't know if you guys are aware of how fucking big Australia is, but that's that's drawing on players from a very large area, and coordinating those people and working with them, and it's amazing. And then all of those people are able to bring their own unique flavor and their own unique perspective on the way that the team should be constructed, the types of lists and strategies that the team's going to use for their pairings process, and then on the day, the way that the team's going to coordinate themselves and the way that the team's going to act. Like, it completely blew my mind that was able to be pulled off, and it was amazing. I think they actually came 2nd or 3rd out of the 50 odd teams. So really, really cool to see those sorts of things. I think it was 25 teams, sorry, I did bad maths. But yeah, either way, the point is that these guys did really, really well, and I think a lot of that they can probably attribute to the fact that they had 4 unique perspectives that were able to blend together and complement each other really well. So yeah, I think that more or less sums it all up, but it's definitely, like, how many of the things did I just say that are amazing about teams events simply don't apply to singles, you know? Singles events sort of feel like they're like the soil that the flower of teams events is grown from, you know? Like, you need the soil, you need that there, you need all of these little singles events where people can come in and they can play and they can meet people and they can be introduced, because it's hard to meet people in a team. You know, you might not know anyone. So like my tournament journey started off attending singles events before I was asked to join the Victorian team. And that's where I met all of my friends. You know, all of my 40K friends that I now consider some of my closest friends, I met through those singles events. So those singles events absolutely need to stay so that we can still have that. But from those singles events, we can grow something that's truly beautiful, that is the team environment. And from that, we can have these amazing events where we get to take the game to the next level, and we get to compensate for all of the weaknesses of singles by removing the monotony of a stagnate meta. We can go, you know what, you have to bring 8 different lists. You have to, this, that, and whatever. And also simultaneously, you can get away with doing foot slogging berserkers. You can get away with doing 4 knights, because we can shore those things up in the pairings process by selecting your tables and all this sort of stuff. So you can do all of this sort of stuff that you literally just can't do in the singles environment. So it simultaneously branches out the team, that branches out the game, to make a really interesting and complex yet simple and engaging, welcoming, just a fucking ripper of an experience. So if you haven't attended a team event before, I highly recommend them. I could not recommend them more. Even if you're on a team with people you've never met before, like, just if you hear that there's a team event coming up and you don't have a team, just contact the TO and just say, mate, I'm super keen, but I don't know anyone. And they, most of them will be happy to help you coordinate a team. For the VTC, I had a few different people hit me up, and basically I was part of the TO council at the start, and basically what I was doing was, people would PM me and be like, Dean, I hear you're helping people who don't have teams. I don't have a team. And I'm like, yeah, no worries. I'll get back to you if I can find anyone. And basically, once I had 4 different people ask me that, I'd be like, okay, well, you 4 can now form a team. So four independent people have come to me saying, I don't have a team. So I'm like, well, now you do. All 4 of you do. So team events can do that. And then you can meet people that way as well. So don't let the fact that it's a team event put you off applying and joining. Just work with your TOs to get in there, and I guarantee you'll never look back. You'll look at it and you'll be like, you might, your first couple might be a bit rough, but when you get a bit more familiar with the process and you get on a team with some more experienced players and that sort of stuff, you'll never look back. And personally, I would love to see an environment where it's a literal 1-to-1 ratio. Maybe you have one event every month, but every second event is a team event. So you have a singles event, then a team event, then a singles event. So 6 of each a year would be cool in each state, or something to that effect. That might be a bit excessive, but yeah, I think team events are definitely the future. And the fact that the WTC, which is pretty much established as the gold standard for competitive 40K, the World Team Championships, the fact that it is also a team event is a really good solid base for team events. Like, team events are never going to go away whilst the World Championships is a team event. That's such a strong indication of the support the competitive community has for these team events. And whether it be 4-man teams or 8-man teams, this doesn't really matter. I think 4-man teams are good because they're a lot more accessible. I'm even toying with a 3-man team possibility, just to see whether that gains any traction. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I have an idea that I think might work in 3-man team events. But hopefully we can get some really solid tournament, what are they called? Franchises, I guess, where people have consistent access to those team events and people have consistent support, so it's worth building up a team and working together and developing the community further. So with that, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you've been to a Teams event recently, chuck a comment below letting me know what you thought and letting me know if you agree with what I've said here about team events being the future of 40K, or whether or not you thought the team event format was bad. Tell me what format you played in. Let me know. Let's have a conversation. And if you know any TOs, send this to them and be like, hey mate, we need to run team events in our area. They might be a little hesitant to jump on board at the start, but I think once they see what this means for the community at large, they'll start to adopt it, because it's, as a TO, one of their main drives is building a community, and when they realize that team events do that so much better, I think a lot of people will make the shift. And yeah, we'll get a conversation going down below. If you disagree with anything that I've said here, I'd also love to hear your opinions. It's not a matter of just, I want a comment section full of Dean, you're correct. I want to hear if people disagree. What about singles that you like better than teams, that sort of stuff. Either way, chuck us a like, chuck us a subscribe, and fucking spam the fuck out of those comments, and let's get a chat going. All right, see you guys.
Welcome to the Blood Yacht.